An assassination plot targeting Burkina Faso's leader Ibrahim Traoré is now unravelling beyond its borders. The former president, accused of being the mastermind of the attack, has been arrested and extradited from Togo.
Power in West Africa is never quiet. It doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives through whispers, betrayals, and gunmetal decisions made in the dark. And right now, Burkina Faso is once again standing at the centre of a storm that refuses to pass. What you're about to hear isn't just another failed coup story. It's a warning about how deep political grudges can travel, how exile doesn't always mean defeat, and how power, once tasted, can turn into obsession. On the surface, it looks simple. Burkina Faso's president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, survives yet another assassination attempt. The government claims the plot was stopped just in time. Arrests are made, statements are issued. But when you look closer, the story becomes far more unsettling. Because this time, the alleged mastermind isn't a foreign mercenary or a shadowy extremist group. It's a former president, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, a man who once sat in the same seat Traoré occupies today, a man who once promised stability, security, and order, only to be overthrown and pushed into exile less than a year later. After losing power, Damiba didn't disappear. He crossed the border into neighbouring Togo, and according to Burkina Faso's authorities, that's where the plotting began. For months, investigators say, plans were quietly taking shape. Not protests, not political negotiations, but assassinations. A coordinated strike designed to decapitate the country's leadership in a single blow. January 3rd was the date, the target. Ibrahim Traoré himself. But it didn't stop there. Senior junta leaders were also marked for elimination. And perhaps most alarming of all, a key drone base used in Burkina Faso's counterinsurgency operations was allegedly set to be disabled. That base, officials say, is critical to fighting armed groups that have terrorised the country for years. Taking it out would have left the military blind, a dangerous moment. According to the government, this wasn't a chaotic rebellion. It was methodical, planned, financed, coordinated from outside the country. And Damiba, they claim, wasn't just involved. He was the architect. Authorities say his role was to design the operation, secure funding, recruit both civilians and military personnel, and keep everything hidden until the final moment. In other words, this wasn't about revenge, it was about a return to power. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Investigators say this wasn't only an external threat, it was also an inside job. A senior Air Force officer allegedly confessed to participating in the plot. Captain Culidiat Prosperi, according to officials, admitted he received nearly $15,000 and took direct orders from Damiba. Communication, they say, happened through encrypted messaging apps. His assignment? Target the Sapone drone base. A move that could have crippled Burkina Faso's military response. This detail changes everything, because it means the danger wasn't just lurking across the border, it was already inside the system. Then comes the allegation that escalates this from a national crisis into a regional one. Burkina Faso claims part of the funding came from Ivory Coast. That accusation alone is explosive. Ivory Coast is one of France's closest allies in the region, and while Abidjan has flatly denied any involvement, Ouagadougou insists the money trail tells a different story, pointing to payments that allegedly reached as high as $125,000. Whether proven or not, these claims fit into a pattern that has been building for years. Burkina Faso has repeatedly accused neighbouring countries of hosting networks working to undermine Traoré's government. Previous plots, previous warnings, previous arrests. And now, yet another attempt. Narrowly avoided. Traoré has survived an extraordinary number of alleged assassination and coup attempts since taking power. Some estimates put the number well above a dozen. He rose amid public fury over terrorist violence that killed thousands and displaced millions. To his supporters, he represents resistance and sovereignty. To his enemies, he is an obstacle that must be removed. And this is only the beginning of the story. What makes this situation even more volatile is that Burkina Faso is not just fighting enemies with guns. It's fighting narratives, alliances, and pressure coming from every direction at once. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just inherit a fragile country when he took power. He inherited a battlefield shaped by foreign interests, regional rivalries, and a population exhausted by years of bloodshed. And since stepping into leadership, he has made decisions that permanently altered Burkina Faso's position in the world. French troops were expelled, long-standing military partnerships were cut loose, and in their place, new alliances were formed, most notably with Russia and with neighbouring Mali and Niger through the alliance of Sahel states. To supporters, this was a declaration of independence. To critics, it was a dangerous gamble. But here's the reality many overlook. Traoré didn't make these moves in a vacuum. He rose to power during a wave of public anger that had reached a breaking point. Armed groups were overrunning communities. Thousands were dead. Millions displaced. The previous leadership was seen as incapable, disconnected, or compromised. When Traoré emerged, he became a symbol, not just of military authority, but of defiance. That symbolism is exactly why the threats against him haven't stopped. Since taking office, authorities claim he has survived at least 18 assassination or coup attempts. 18. That number alone tells you the kind of pressure this government is under. Some say the real number is even higher, and every failed plot leaves behind the same question. How long can a leader govern while constantly looking over his shoulder? The government insists that this latest attempt would have plunged the country into chaos had it succeeded. Burkina Faso would have been facing its third coup in just 4 years. A cycle of instability that never truly resets. It just mutates. And once again, Ivory Coast appears in the background of the accusations. Burkina Faso's leadership has repeatedly pointed fingers at Abidjan, claiming networks of former officers and political actors are operating from Ivorian territory. In April last year, officials said they dismantled another major plot linked to ex-military figures abroad. In July, Traoré publicly accused Ivory Coast and Benin of hosting foreign military bases that, in his words, enabled destabilisation efforts. Ivory Coast has denied these claims, but denial hasn't stopped the mistrust from deepening. This is where the story stops being about one man and becomes about the entire region. West Africa is on edge. Governments are falling. Alliances are shifting. And the Sahel has become a chessboard where every move sends shockwaves across borders. When something happens in Ouagadougou, it doesn't stay in Ouagadougou. It ripples outward into Niger, Mali, Benin, Ivory Coast, and beyond. For Traoré's supporters, the repeated assassination attempts prove he is challenging powerful interests. They see him as a leader who refuses to bow, even under relentless pressure. They point to massive public rallies and street support as evidence that he still holds the trust of ordinary Burkinabe. But critics paint a different picture. They argue that the constant state of emergency has come at a heavy cost. Media restrictions, suppressed dissent, civilians increasingly drawn into the war effort. To them, stability achieved through silence is not true stability at all. And that contradiction is the heart of Burkina Faso's dilemma. How do you defend a nation under siege without becoming what you claim to oppose? How do you protect sovereignty while avoiding isolation? How long can emergency rule remain temporary before it becomes permanent? For now, the government says the immediate threat has been neutralised. Arrests are ongoing. Intelligence services remain on high alert. And the return of Damiba from Togo signals that one chapter may be closing. But no one in Ouagadougou is celebrating. Because in a country where power has changed hands through force more than ballots, history doesn't move forward cleanly. It circles back. And every unresolved grievance becomes the seed of the next crisis. And this is why no one in Burkina Faso believes the danger is truly over. Because even when a plot fails, the conditions that produced it don't simply vanish. They linger, they regroup, they wait. The alleged return of Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba from Togo may close one door, but it opens another question that many are afraid to ask out loud. Was this really the end of the threat, or just the exposure of how deep it runs? Damiba's story is not unique in West Africa. A former leader overthrown, pushed into exile, and accused of refusing to let go of power. What makes this case different is how close it reportedly came to succeeding, and how many layers it appears to have involved. Foreign coordination, internal collaborators, financial trails crossing borders, a carefully chosen date, strategic military targets. This wasn't desperation. This was calculation. Burkina Faso's intelligence services insist they stop the operation just in time. But just in time is not the kind of reassurance that brings peace in a country already haunted by instability. It only reinforces how narrow the margin for survival has become. If this plot had succeeded, the consequences would have been devastating. A third coup in 4 years, a leadership vacuum, military paralysis, and a nation already struggling against armed groups pushed even closer to collapse. That reality is why the government is framing this as more than an assassination attempt. It is calling it an existential threat. And yet, even as officials claim control, the pressure keeps mounting. Traore governs under constant threat. Every speech, every public appearance, every decision is made with the awareness that enemies may already be moving again. Supporters see resilience. Critics see fragility masked by force. Both sides agree on one thing. Burkina Faso is walking a tightrope. The regional implications make that rope even thinner. West Africa is undergoing a transformation unlike anything seen in decades. Military governments are replacing civilian ones. Long-standing alliances are fracturing. New blocs are forming. The alliance of Sahel states is not just a political arrangement. It is a signal that the old order is being challenged head-on, and challenges invite resistance. Ivory Coast's repeated denials have not eased tensions, nor have accusations. Involving Benin, trust between neighbours is eroding, replaced by suspicion and strategic silence. In this environment, even unproven claims carry weight, because perception alone can reshape alliances. Inside Burkina Faso, the population remains deeply divided, not necessarily over Traoré himself, but over what survival should look like. Is strong rule the price of security? Or is security meaningless without freedom? These questions don't have easy answers in a country fighting for its existence. For now, the government says the threat has been neutralised. Arrests continue, investigations deepen, and officials insist they remain vigilant. But history in Burkina Faso has taught its people one lesson above all else. Calm is temporary. Coups don't announce themselves until they are already happening. Assassination plots don't always fail. And power once contested rarely rests. So while one chapter may be closing with Damiba's expulsion from Togo, the story itself is far from finished. Because in Burkina Faso, power doesn't simply change hands. It is hunted, defended, and endlessly challenged. And until the roots of instability are addressed, every quiet moment is just a pause before the next storm.